What many once dismissed as harmless internet noise, isolated whispers buried in comment sections, cropped screenshots passed between strangers, speculative threads that flickered and faded, has now been formally addressed by the palace. What seemed at first glance like digital static has culminated in an official declaration. Prince Louis's DNA results have been verified. An explosive chapter has closed, but not before exposing just how fragile certainty can become in the age of suspicion. For months, unease had been building beneath the surface. It did not erupt overnight. It gathered quietly, post by post, frame by frame. Self-appointed online investigators began dissecting public appearances with forensic intensity. Anonymous accounts hinted at inconsistencies. Comment sections filled with side-by-side comparisons, freeze frames, magnified facial features. Innocent expressions were examined as if they concealed coded meaning. Fleeting gestures were replayed until they appeared deliberate. What began as scattered curiosity gradually hardened into something more persistent, more corrosive: doubt. And doubt, once seeded, does not require proof to survive. Photographs were extracted from context and reassembled like evidence boards. Video clips were slowed until natural movement seemed unnatural. Social media algorithms did the rest, amplifying speculation with ruthless efficiency. The narrative expanded, feeding on repetition. The louder it became, the more credible it appeared. Soon, the noise no longer sounded like rumor, it sounded like investigation. Then at precisely 2:00 p.m. GMT, the silence came. The palace released its statement with deliberate timing. Documents were made public not casually, but as a controlled response to a story that had grown beyond containment. Behind the online frenzy, officials had been dealing with something far more serious, a series of anonymous letters, each more detailed than the last. These were not vague accusations scribbled in haste. They were composed carefully, meticulous, specific, unsettling. The letters referenced a brief power outage at St. Mary's Hospital on the night of Prince Louis's birth. They invoked the possibility of procedural disruption. They introduced a phrase that would ignite further speculation: a doppelganger child. They named corridors. They cited timestamps. They described movement within the maternity wing during those 17 minutes of darkness. Whether fabricated or not, the detail was enough to force attention. Inside palace walls, the situation was no longer theoretical. What the public debated online had crossed into official correspondence. The timing of the palace's response was not coincidence, they insisted. Months of coordinated speculation had converged with private allegations. Silence had ceased to be protective, it had become risky. Internally, advisors would later describe the period as a season of speculation. It had not begun with hostility. There were no dramatic headlines at first, only a subtle shift in tone. Earlier in the summer, a passing observation had acted as a spark, a casual remark, a fleeting comment about appearance, nothing inflammatory, nothing overt. But in the wrong climate, even an innocent observation can become a trigger. Royal families are no strangers to rumor cycles. Whispers rise, whispers fade. That is the rhythm of public life. But this time, two elements aligned, one visible, one intangible, and together they created a narrative that refused to dissipate. The first shift occurred during a community volunteer event. The Wales family joined local residents in clearing litter. It was meant to be unremarkable, grounded, ordinary, human. Later, a handful of attendees remarked that Prince Louis appeared quieter than usual, not distressed, not unruly, just slightly withdrawn, a fraction less animated. Standing beside George and Charlotte, he seemed momentarily out of sync. Under normal circumstances, such subtlety would vanish into memory. But in an atmosphere primed for interpretation, subtlety becomes signal. Those observations lingered, they were repeated, and repetition gave them weight. Then came the royal garden party. The setting was immaculate, expansive lawns cut with surgical precision, white tents glowing beneath filtered summer light, dignitaries drifting between conversations. William moved with composed familiarity. Catherine greeted guests with effortless grace, and Louis, holding his mother's hand, crossed the palace grounds under the watch of hundreds of lenses. The cameras did not simply capture the moment, they studied it. Observers would later say something felt different. No one could articulate exactly what. It was not fear, not alarm, just an indistinct variation enough to spark comparison. Some claimed his hair reflected sunlight in an unusual way. Others pointed to subtle tonal differences when placed beside his siblings, harmless comments, casual remarks. Until they were. Once transferred online, the observations mutated. Freeze frames circulated across platforms. Composite images were created. Threads dissected facial structure, jawlines, bone angles. Comparisons to siblings became calculations. Algorithms elevated engagement. Engagement rewarded suspicion. The tone shifted from curiosity to conclusion. What might have remained fleeting commentary evolved into a growing narrative. one that did not ask whether something was wrong, but quietly assumed it was. Inside the palace, that shift was felt immediately. What the public saw as digital debate had become something far more destabilizing, a story with momentum. And momentum in the digital era can be more powerful than truth. The letters arrived soon after. Plain envelopes, no return address, typed pages containing unnerving specificity about April 2018, a documented power outage, 2 births within the same hour, temporary relocation within the maternity ward, emergency lighting, procedural strain. The accusation was never directly stated. It did not need to be. The implication hung in the air like static before a storm. Confusion during those 17 minutes could have led to an irreversible mistake. That was enough. And once that possibility was introduced, not as gossip but as detailed allegation, the crisis crossed an invisible threshold. It was no longer about resemblance. It was about identity. And in matters of identity, especially within a monarchy, certainty is not optional. Within hours, what had been murmured in private became a spectacle unfolding in real time. A single question posted online, "Does Louis look different today?" spread like a spark in dry brush. It did not accuse, it did not conclude, it simply lingered long enough to invite interpretation. And interpretation in the digital age rarely remains neutral. Screenshots multiplied across platforms. Video clips were replayed in slow motion, movements examined frame by frame as if hidden meaning might emerge under scrutiny. Side-by-side comparisons flooded timelines. A self-styled digital analyst assembled composite images of the 3 siblings taken across various public engagements, presenting them not as speculation but as analysis. George, they argued, carried unmistakable traces of Catherine and William. Charlotte, they said, mirrored her father and even echoed the late Queen Elizabeth II. But Louis, according to the thread, seemed more difficult to define, harder to place. The framing was careful, measured, almost academic in tone, and that subtlety made it more dangerous. Curiosity shifted into suggestion, suggestion calcified into assertion. Soon, archived photographs were unearthed and stitched together like exhibits in a courtroom file. Images from different years, different lighting conditions, different angles compressed into a single narrative. Out-of-context comparisons were presented as evidence supporting an unverified implication that Louis did not share the same genetic makeup as his siblings. Questions no longer ended in question marks. They ended in statements. Statements turned into conviction. Proof became irrelevant. Lighting differences were dismissed. Camera distortion was ignored. Natural variation in childhood development was reframed as anomaly. Identity, something deeply personal and profoundly human, had become public debate material. At subsequent public appearances, the atmosphere subtly shifted. Catherine reportedly sensed it first. The gaze directed toward her youngest son no longer resembled ordinary curiosity. It felt measured, analytical, searching. Cameras lingered not for celebration but for examination. William maintained his composure with practiced precision, greeting guests with controlled warmth. Yet observers later described a faint tightening around his jaw, a restraint just beneath the surface. Without discussion, both parents began positioning themselves closer to Louis. A step inward, a slight shift of posture, an almost imperceptible adjustment that formed a quiet barrier between their child and the lenses surrounding him. It was not theatrical, it was instinctive. Protection does not need announcement to be visible. Online, the speculation darkened. Anonymous accounts introduced more elaborate theories, claims of replacement, insinuations of a hospital switch at birth. Entertainment programs began airing cautious segments, presenting side-by-side comparisons under the guise of analysis. Hosts avoided direct allegations, choosing instead to pose leading questions and invite viewers to consider the possibility. They framed it as inquiry, as conversation. The impact was the same. The palace remained silent. But silence does not prevent consequence. It often intensifies it. Beyond royal grounds, the ripple effects became tangible. Catherine's parents reportedly reached out, worried about the emotional toll such rumors might exact. William's close friends offered private support. At Lambrook School W. Here George and Charlotte attended classes. Other parents began whispering in corridors and at pickup gates. What had originated as digital conjecture had crossed into lived reality. And at the center of it all was a 7-year-old child. Prince Louis remained blissfully unaware of the storm gathering around his name. Shielded carefully by his parents, he continued playing with his siblings, laughing, running, moving through childhood untouched by the narratives adults were constructing about him. That contrast, innocence against suspicion, deepened the gravity of the unfolding crisis. Then the letters arrived. The first envelope was unremarkable, plain white no return address. It could have been routine correspondence. Inside were 4 typed pages, structured, deliberate, disturbingly precise. The letter focused exclusively on April 2018, the night of Louis's birth at the Lindo wing of St. Mary's Hospital. The anonymous writer claimed to have been present. The pages described what were termed irregularities during a documented power outage that evening, specifically a temporary disruption to electronic tagging systems in the maternity ward. The letter referenced timestamps, room assignments, internal corridor names. It described staff movements during those 17 minutes when normal operations were allegedly strained. The accusation was never explicit. It did not need to be. Whether entirely fabricated or carefully constructed from fragments of truth, the level of detail was enough to pierce dismissal. What had begun as internet speculation had crossed into written allegation, into documentation. And once doubt moves from rumor to paper, it acquires weight. Inside palace walls, attention shifted from optics to risk, because this was no longer about resemblance. It was about identity. A second envelope arrived only days later. It did not retract, it expanded. The anonymous writer deepened the narrative, alleging that another baby had been born in a nearby room on the same night. According to the letter, during the 17-minute power outage, both newborns were temporarily moved into a shared nursery space while systems were restored. Emergency lighting, procedural strain, staff operating under pressure. Again, no direct accusation was made. But the implication sharpened. In moments of confusion, mistakes can happen, and sometimes mistakes go unnoticed. Before investigators could fully process the second letter, a third arrived. This one was different. Inside were printed photographs, images of the maternity ward's internal layout, floor plans, corridor angles, annotations scrawled in red ink marking staff positions and alleged movements during the outage. The presentation was calculated, almost clinical. Whether authentic or manipulated, the materials were convincing enough to disturb. The sender had clearly anticipated scrutiny. Palace investigators moved swiftly. The letters were examined for fingerprints, trace fibers, printing signatures, watermark inconsistencies, anything that might identify the source. Nothing substantial surfaced. The envelopes were commercially common, the paper stock easily accessible, the typing method untraceable. Whoever had composed the letters had prepared for examination. Hospital records were formally requested and quietly reviewed. Maintenance logs confirmed that a power outage had occurred on the night in question, 17 minutes in duration, officially documented. Delivery records confirmed that 2 babies had indeed been born within the same hour. Individually, none of these facts proved wrongdoing. Hospitals manage outages, births overlap, procedures account for contingencies. Yet the alignment was enough to prevent immediate dismissal. Inside palace walls, the narrative shifted from irritation to unease. Meanwhile, miles away in a modest South London home, a different anxiety was taking shape. A woman known publicly only as Sarah Harrison sat watching the evening news. Footage of Prince Louis played repeatedly across the screen, slow-motion shots from recent public appearances. Her husband entered the room carrying their 7-year-old son, Thomas, fresh from a bath and wrapped loosely in a towel. Sarah's gaze moved from the television to her child. And then she stopped breathing. The resemblance unsettled her in a way she could not immediately explain. It was not identical, but close enough. The sandy hair catching the light, the shape of the nose, the curve of the cheek. For years, Thomas had not strongly resembled either parent. Mark and Sarah, both darker-skinned, had attributed the difference to distant ancestry, recessive traits, the unpredictable lottery of genetics. Now, with speculation echoing across the country, the coincidence felt heavier. Thomas, too, had been born at St. Mary's Hospital. The same night. The same wing. Sarah remembered the moment clearly now, a brief separation from her newborn during what staff had described as technical issues. There had been movement in the corridor, flashing emergency lights, nurses speaking quickly but calmly. She had been exhausted, overwhelmed, grateful simply to hold her child again. She never questioned the explanation. Until now. That night, neither she nor her husband slept. They searched online archives, old news reports, forum discussions, references to a power outage, timelines, details. The pieces aligned just enough to make certainty feel fragile. By morning, they contacted hospital administrators requesting clarification. They also sent a copy of the anonymous letter to Kensington Palace, along with a careful account of their own experience. They did not accuse, They did not demand. They asked for clarity. Inside palace walls, the situation shifted dramatically. What had been rumor, anonymous and distant, was now mirrored by a real family asking the same question. The issue could no longer be dismissed as digital hysteria. A closed-door meeting convened among senior advisors. Faces were controlled, voices measured, but the tension was unmistakable. Some warned that agreeing to DNA testing would legitimize conspiracy, that the monarchy could not appear to bend under internet pressure. Others argued that optics were secondary to certainty. Doubt once seeded could outlive silence. Catherine reportedly spoke with firm clarity. This was not about calming public speculation, she said. It was about the future, about the day her son would inevitably read his own name online. He deserved to grow up without shadow, without uncertainty attached to his identity. William agreed. Testing would not be surrender, it would be resolution. Under strict confidentiality, buccal swabs were collected from William, Catherine, and Prince Louis. The Harrisons consented to the same process for Thomas. Samples were sent to 2 independent laboratories operating under layered security protocols. Results would be cross-verified to eliminate even the smallest margin of error. And then came the waiting. Publicly, nothing changed. Appearances were maintained, smiles remained steady, schedules continued without interruption, cameras captured composure. Privately, the atmosphere was different. Catherine reportedly stood beside Louis's bed at night, watching him sleep in the quiet dark, repeating to herself what instinct already told her. She did not doubt him, she doubted the world around him. William, meanwhile, allowed himself to imagine scenarios he never thought possible. Constitutional instability, emotional fracture, a future rewritten by 17 minutes in a hospital corridor. In the final days of waiting, William sought quiet counsel from King Charles. Those familiar with the conversation later described it as solemn. Charles reminded his son that family is defined by love, but succession in the monarchy is defined by lineage. Both truths could coexist, both carried weight. And now, only science could close the space between them. When the call finally came, it was brief, so brief it felt almost unreal. Less than 3 minutes. William listened without speaking. On the other end of the line, the royal physician delivered the result with clinical precision. There was no hesitation, no ambiguity, no room for interpretation. A 99.999% genetic match. No procedural error, no uncertainty, no deviation. Prince Louis was, beyond statistical doubt, the biological son of William and Catherine. For weeks, tension had pressed silently against the walls of their private lives. In that moment, it released all at once, not dramatically, not publicly, but in a quiet exhale that carried the weight of sleepless nights and unspoken fear. Shortly thereafter, confirmation arrived for the Harrison family as well. Independent analysis established that Thomas Harrison was unequivocally the biological child of Sarah and Mark Harrison. The resemblance between the 2 boys, so compelling under the glare of suspicion, was determined to be rare but scientifically plausible. Genetics, in its complexity, had produced coincidence, not conspiracy. At precisely 2:00 p.m., Kensington Palace moved with calculated clarity. An official statement was released to international media outlets. It confirmed that the Prince and Princess of Wales had authorized DNA testing in response to persistent and baseless rumors. The results, verified by independent medical experts, left no space for doubt. Prince Louis is their biological child. The statement was measured, factual, restrained. It ended with a firm request that the privacy of all children be respected and that the matter be considered resolved. Within minutes, the reaction was global. News networks interrupted programming, breaking banners scrolled across screens. Commentators shifted tone from speculation to analysis. Social media, once saturated with doubt, filled with relief, reflection, and in some corners, quiet reckoning. The narrative that had gathered momentum for months dissolved almost instantly. Dare the weight of empirical evidence. Behind the scenes, investigators finalized their findings regarding the anonymous letters. Forensic language analysis and internal hospital cross-referencing led to a former hospital administrator, an individual dismissed years earlier for documented misconduct. Authorities concluded the motive was grievance, not revelation. A calculated attempt to weaponize partial knowledge and public appetite for suspicion. No public prosecution followed. The palace, after internal deliberation, chose de-escalation over spectacle. A courtroom battle would only extend the story's lifespan. Instead, the focus shifted toward restoration. Catherine reportedly wrote a private handwritten letter to Sarah Harrison, acknowledging the emotional turbulence the ordeal must have caused. She expressed empathy for the unimaginable fear of questioning one's child and gratitude for the patience shown while the process unfolded. Sarah later described the letter as kind, grounding, and unexpectedly healing. There were no interviews, no televised reconciliation, just closure. And at the center of it all, the child whose name had circled the world remained blissfully untouched by it. Prince Louis was seen riding his bicycle across the grounds of Windsor, laughing as he raced ahead of security officers attempting to keep pace. The wind caught his hair. His world remained small, immediate, and uncomplicated. For him, nothing had changed. For his parents, everything had. The crisis left an imprint, not because of DNA, but because of doubt. It exposed how swiftly speculation can eclipse reality in the digital age, how a single image, isolated from context, can ignite global suspicion, how a question posed casually can evolve into conviction without evidence. Truth arrived eventually, but truth is rarely as loud as rumor. Science confirmed what William and Catherine had never truly doubted, yet the broader question lingers beyond the walls of Kensington Palace. In an era defined by viral judgment and algorithm-driven amplification, where does a child's right to innocence end and public curiosity begin? For the Wales family, the answer appears unwavering. They will protect their children at any cost, even if that protection requires public transparency, even if it means submitting private certainty to scientific verification. Their son is Prince Louis. He was and always has been. And perhaps the deeper lesson of this chapter is not genetic at all. It is about responsibility, about how we consume information, how quickly we elevate suspicion into narrative, how easily speculation, once unleashed, can endanger the very people it claims to scrutinize. In the end, the crisis was not about identity. It was about the cost of doubt.